Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever, wherever you are listening. Thank you so very much for making me a part of your day. My name is Lee Parham. You might know me as Lego Lee or Lego Lee 329 from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, you name it. I'm all over the internet, and you are listening to the Brickology podcast, the study of small plastic bricks. How are you doing today? I really hope you are just doing super, super well, and Brickology, like I said last week, we are officially over the hump. We are in the 40s for Brickology, which is crazy. And that means we are nearing towards the end of Brickology Season 4 as a whole. Man, I love how this show is going, and ever since I quit my job, I've had so much fun just producing these episodes. I think they are bigger and better than ever. And like I said, we're nearing the end of season 4, but today's episode is going to be a little bit different, and I'll explain why in just a minute. But before we do that, of course, I have to shamelessly plug myself. Guys, go follow me online. I have tons of social media pages. My Instagram account, I literally post daily over there. So if you want your daily dose of Lego content, check me out on Instagram. I also have an accompanying Facebook page. I have a Twitter that I don't really use, but it's there. I also have a YouTube channel, which my YouTube channel was just approved for partnership, which is super, super excited and gives me even more motivation to put good effort into this podcast and other videos. So definitely go check me out on YouTube and check me out on Patreon. There's going to be some cool Patreon content coming soon, I promise, and Patreon even exclusively has previews of upcoming videos and podcasts. And at some point, I'm not sure when, but at some point there's going to be a Patreon exclusive episode of this podcast, so definitely check me out there. And one more thing. I recorded a new podcast. A buddy of mine from school, we made a podcast, and it's called The Very Manly Muppets Show. Yes, it's literally about the Muppets. We've made one episode. It's an hour and 17 minutes long. It is quite the listen, but it's super fun, super enjoyable. Check out The Very Manly Muppets Show. It is on Spotify. Please go stream that show. I'm pretty excited about this podcast. It's going to be super fun. Not sure how consistent that'll be because we have to meet up to record said podcast, but the first episode is out now. Definitely go check that out. Okay, announcements and plugs out of the way. Let's talk about today's episode of Brickology. Now, last week I mentioned that because of Chinese New Year starting on that particular day, I switched up my normal pattern of doing an episode about an unlicensed theme and an episode from a licensed theme. So I did 2 unlicensed themes in a row, and now I'm going to do 2 licensed themes in a row. However, the 2 episodes you're about to hear are going to be a little bit different, because normally around the 7th episode of a season, this one is the 8th episode, but around the 7th episode of a season of Brickology, I do a Star Wars episode, and I have been going through all the Lego Star Wars sets. It's one of my lofty goals for this podcast, is to eventually cover every single Lego Star Wars set ever made. And I've been going through the films in chronological order that they happen in the universe. So the first episode ever of Brickology was about Lego Star Wars Episode 1. Then I did 2, 3, the movies in between, the Clone Wars Rebels shows, all that fun stuff. And now we're finally at the point where chronologically we have the original Star Wars trilogy to talk about. So my last episode was Rogue One, which of course leads directly into Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. So that is today's episode of Brickology. However, there's a lot of content from this movie. Obviously, this is one of the biggest movies of all time, and some of the most iconic vehicles and sets and Lego come from this particular film. There's over 50 sets from this movie alone, spanning 22 years of Lego Star Wars. That's a lot. That is a lot. And honestly, if I covered all of that in today's episode of Brickology, I would guess the episode would be about 2 hours plus, maybe. And I'm not sure I personally have the energy to record and edit that long of a podcast. And I'm not sure you, the listener, have the energy to listen to that long of a podcast. So instead of doing all one episode for this film, I'm doing something I've never done before. This is going to be the first first part of a two-part episode. So today, we're kind of dividing it up by what I'm calling decades, which is technically 11 years, but decades still work. So today, we're going to be talking about the sets from Star Wars Episode 4 from 1999, when LEGO Star Wars first came out, through 2009, so the end of the 2000s. Next week will be a follow-up episode that will follow all the sets from the 2010s decade, plus, of course, 2020 and 2021. So it's not a quietly an even divide. Actually, next week should be a little bit longer, but it was the best way, in my opinion, to do it. So without further ado, let's start talking about the LEGO Star Wars Episode 4 sets from 99 through 2009. Now, as per usual here at Brickology, we love to discuss the history of a source material when talking about a licensed theme. And you know what? This source material is pretty famous. It's a little movie called Star Wars. It came out in 1977. You might have heard of it. You might have seen it. Now, I've done plenty of Star Wars episodes in the past, and I have talked about the history of Star Wars toys, and LEGO Star Wars ad nauseum. I mean, seriously, I have gone on and on about them, and I also want you guys to listen to my other episodes of Brickology, so if you're interested in learning more about the history of Star Wars toys, and LEGO Star Wars specifically, go stream all the other Star Wars episodes of Brickology, especially the first one I ever did, Episode 1. Check that out because I definitely talked about a lot of that in that episode. So today, I'm not really going to talk too much about that because it's going to take up way too much time, and honestly, I think you guys are smart. You guys are very smart and you're very knowledgeable, and if you're listening to a LEGO podcast, especially one about LEGO Star Wars, I think you probably know your Star Wars history pretty well, so I'm not going to dumb you down as an audience. Obviously, the original Star Wars movie is one of the biggest movies of all time. It changed pop culture and Hollywood and blockbuster filmmaking forever. And the one little fact I want to point out is I might end up calling this movie just Star Wars throughout the review. If you're not aware, originally the movie was just called Star Wars, and then they changed the name to Star Wars A New Hope a few years later. So I might call this movie Star Wars throughout the episode of Brickology today, but besides that, let's jump right in. LEGO first started making LEGO Star Wars sets in the year 1999. Now, of course, that was coinciding with the release of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, but at the same time, I mean, obviously, I think LEGO would have been dumb to only release Phantom Menace sets at that time because obviously Phantom Menace hadn't even come out when they first started releasing these sets, so they also released a wave of sets based off the original Star Wars trilogy. And let's talk about it now. Here is the year 1999, and we get a few firsts for LEGO, and throughout this episode today, you're going to hear me say the word, "This is the first ever appearance of this," a lot, because, well, that's true. These are the first ever appearances of iconic characters and vehicles in LEGO form, ever. Some of the most iconic stuff you'll ever hear about in Star Wars. So without further ado, let's jump in with the first set, a $6 set with only 49 pieces, and that is the Land Speeder. Now, the Land Speeder has a very interesting place among the LEGO Star Wars community because it's been remade a lot here recently. We seem to get a remake of this vehicle once every 4 years for some reason. I'm not sure why LEGO is so obsessed with remaking this vehicle all the time, but this is the OG, the original Land Speeder, which was $6 like I mentioned, and it had two figures. You get Luke Skywalker and you get Obi-Wan Kenobi, the first ever minifigures of these two iconic Star Wars heroes. And these figures are yellow figures. So a little brief history for LEGO. If you are a newer LEGO fan, you might not be aware of this, but back in the day, all LEGO figures were yellow. I believe the year was 2004. About halfway through 2004, LEGO actually started making flesh tone minifigures for licensed themes specifically, and let the yellow figures only be for unlicensed themes, which is quite interesting. Not sure exactly why they changed that, but they were yellow figures back in the day. And as for the build of this set, you get the Land Speeder, the first ever design of this vehicle. And honestly, if you don't know what this looks like, I would suggest Googling it. This is a very good looking Land Speeder for 1999. It really holds up. It has good proportions. It's got good design techniques. I think they did a really good job with this set, and it can seat 2 figures. Now, the engine details aren't quite accurate, and there's no extra storage or places to put R2 or 3PO. Whatever. It's still really well done for the time period, which is not something you're going to hear me say about all the old LEGO Star Wars vehicles throughout Brickology, so that is high praise from me. Now, it is made in mostly tan and kind of a normal red color, which the more modern Land Speeders have kind of a burnt-ish tan color and dark red, which is definitely more accurate. However, I don't believe either of those colors existed back in 99, so seriously, I think this is about as good as it's going to get for a 1999 LEGO Star Wars set. And this is actually one of the first sets I remember having as a kid. Now, I believe it was a hand-me-down from my brother. I'm not sure if I ever specifically purchased this set in particular, but I definitely remember having this set. And I actually still have a version of this set built to my collection today. I bought a sealed version on eBay a few years back. Now, moving up, a big jump in price here at $30 with 266 pieces is the X-Wing fighter. First off, isn't it crazy the original X-Wing was only $30? Now, they did downsize the X-Wings recently in 2021, but the 2020 X-Wing was $90, so 3 times the amount of the OG X-Wing. And this X-Wing included the figures of Luke Skywalker in his X-Wing pilot jumpsuit. You also got Biggs Darklighter, the first ever appearance of Lego R2-D2, and you got a Rebel engineer. So a pretty nice little minifigure lineup for this set. And as for the builds of this set, before we talk about the X-Wing, you actually got a side build here, which is a small little kind of buggy vehicle for the Rebel base that could be driven around and also had some storage for tools at the back. Now, LEGO loves including these vehicles. They're always kind of yellowish, and honestly, they've been coming in LEGO sets for over 2 decades now. LEGO loves these side builds, and this is the original one of this type of side build. Now, the main build of this set, of course, is the X-Wing itself, and this is the only original trilogy X-Wing LEGO has made in gray. So the OG X-Wing was actually a gray design and not a white design. And frankly, I think gray is kind of accurate. It's kind of an ugly, maybe dirty white in the movie, but it definitely looks pretty gray, but all of them have been white ever since. Now, I get why LEGO has switched to making X-Wings white, because white is definitely a more visually appealing color than gray, but I believe personally that gray is the more accurate color. It's not quite as bad as making the snow speeders in white instead of gray, which is something we'll talk about in the Empire Strikes Back episode of Brickology, which will happen in season 5 probably in a month or 2. But this is the only X-Wing LEGO has ever made in gray, and honestly, quite like the Land Speeder, this build holds up, man. This looks really, really good. The proportions are good. The front nose has a nice printed piece, and on the nose there's also a storage container with a folding flap, which is a feature that LEGO has not put on any of the X-Wings since, which I honestly kind of miss. And it also introduced the iconic X-Wing cockpit piece that is still used to this day. Now, oddly enough, that piece is not being used on X-Wings anymore. In 2015, with The Force Awakens, they introduced a new X-Wing cockpit piece, but that piece is being used on Y-Wing snowspeeders and a number of other vehicles, licensed and unlicensed alike. And it's a very cool cockpit piece, and obviously, your Luke Skywalker minifigure can sit in the cockpit, and R2-D2 can go. And back behind R2-D2, there is an opening for more storage, which is nice to see. And of course, the main feature with any X-Wing is the S-foils can deploy. Now, there was no fun, fancy mechanism. They're just on hinges, and you have to kind of crack the hinges to make them deploy, which it looks good, definitely not as fun for playability as some of the new X-Wings, which have some really clever mechanisms, but it was very good for the time. And first off, I think the price of this set was pretty much hard to beat. $30 for such an iconic vehicle is incredible, and I think this design really holds up well, and I love the fact that it's built in gray. And finally, the last set from the year 1999, the $50 409-piece set is known as TIE Fighter and Y-Wing. Now, the figures included with this set, first off, you get Dutch Vander, aka the Gold Leader, and his astromech droid, who is R5-D4. The one other minifigure included with this set is the first ever appearance of Lego Darth Vader, which is great to see. Now, the builds of this set, like I mentioned, this has a TIE Fighter and a Y-Wing. Now, the TIE Fighter included with this set is the TIE Advance, which Lego loves to call Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. It has a name, Lego. It's the TIE Advance. I'm not sure why they don't like actually using its technical name within Star Wars canon. And this is the first ever Lego TIE anything. They actually didn't make a TIE Fighter until a couple years later, which is interesting to me, but this is the first ever Lego twin ion engine vehicle, and it introduced us to the original TIE Fighter cockpit piece, which has now been discontinued, but was a very cool piece at the time. And of course, there is space for Darth Vader to sit inside. And for some reason, now in the universe, TIE Fighters are kind of sandish blue, a very faded blue color, and Lego didn't have sand blue quite yet at the time, so the accents on their OG TIE Fighter sets are literally just blue, like a very normal blue color. And it looks so stupid. It does not look accurate at all. I just hate the look of the blue on these TIE Fighters, and that is going to continue for at least 6 more years, which is insane to me that Lego took so long to actually rectify this issue with TIE Fighters. Nowadays, they just use gray as accents, which I think is better than the blue. I wish they would fully commit to using sand blue at some point in time, but little rant over about the colors of TIE Fighter. I just don't understand the decision making of making TIE Fighters with just a very bright blue color. Now, the other build of this set, of course, is the Y-Wing. So the first ever appearance of the Y-Wing, which used the same cockpit piece as the X-Wing, and Y-Wings today still use that same cockpit piece. And this Y-Wing, of course, had a cockpit that could fit Gold Leader with the droid behind them, and there is a space for a storage crate in between. There's also a turret in between the cockpit and the droid as well, and it has a very nice design, very sturdy, looks very good. It is kind of blocky, but I think it holds up fairly well. The only big thing that this one does not have is no bomb dropping play feature. Obviously, Y-Wings iconically drop bombs in the Star Wars universe, and it would have been nice to have seen a bomb dropping feature for this particular Y-Wing, but we did not get that here. So that is it for all the 1990s Lego Star Wars sets, obviously only 1 year. Now we can move into the bigger decade that we're going to talk about on today's episode of Brickology, which is the 2000s. And the year 2000 saw the release of the Millennium Falcon. First off, I think it's kind of ironic that the first year of the new millennium, the 2000s millennium, saw the release of the Millennium Falcon. I don't know if that was intentional, just kind of a funny little detail. Now, the OG Millennium Falcon was $100 and had 663 pieces. Not a great price per piece, but there are some very large pieces in this set. And the figures included here, one, you get Luke Skywalker, you get the first ever appearance of Princess Leia and Han Solo, and you also get a Chewbacca minifigure, you get C-3PO, and you get R2-D2. So pretty much all of the iconic Star Wars characters. And the build is the first ever Lego Millennium Falcon. Yay! So exciting. This build sucks. I'm sorry. I probably just pissed off so many classic Lego Star Wars fans. This set is terrible. This set does not hold up. It looks awful. This build is rough. Those 1999 builds I just talked about for the X-Wing, Landspeeder, Y-Wing, and TIE Advance, all of those still look pretty solid today. This one does not. I'm not sure why this build in particular is so bad, because the 2004 Millennium Falcon, based off The Empire Strikes Back, just 4 years later, honestly looks really, really good. But for some reason, this one in particular is just so bad. Lego just made pretty much every mistake here, and if you don't know what this set looks like, definitely give it a Google, because you need to look at how awful this thing looks. The cockpit piece is a borrowed piece from some classic space themes, and it has a very awkward, abrupt cutoff that just looks strange, and they made no effort to make it look finished, so there's just an exposed red piece at the front. Oh boy, it looks really bad. Now the roof isn't terrible. I'll give them some credit. The roof is actually not bad. Again, some borrowed pieces from space themes. It used the flying saucer pieces, which, they made a pretty good roof, and they had some good printing on them, which is nice to see. But the whole set just has random ugly colors exposed for no reason. Now, you could remove the entire roof to reveal the interior where there's an escape pod, which I find ironic. There's an escape pod in this Millennium Falcon set, because you never see an escape pod on the Falcon until The Last Jedi, which came out in 2017. So kind of an odd little detail. There's just nothing great about this set. It's iconic, and I'm sure so many people have some nostalgic attachment to it, but I don't have this set. It's actually the only minifig scale Millennium Falcon I don't have besides the 2007 UCS Millennium Falcon, so I have no attachment to this set in particular, and I think it just looks seriously so ugly. Now, that is the only set from the year 2000 for Star Wars Episode 4, so let's jump to 2001 with another small set, a $6 set known as the Droid Escape that only had 45 pieces. Now, I remember getting this set in particular at a KB Toys. I'd really just dated myself there with KB Toys, but do you remember KB Toys? Let me know. I would love to hear if more people are aware of what KB Toys is. As for the figures in this set, I'll give you a guess. Say it with me in 3, 2, 1. R2 and 3PO. Yep, you get R2-D2 and C-3PO with the Droid Escape set. Big shocker there. And the build here is, with me, 3, 2, 1, an escape pod. You get the Droid Escape pod that comes out of the Tainted 4 in the movie. It's a pretty inaccurate escape pod as well. Kind of like the Falcon, this one really did not hold up. Now, it does have some very nice printed cylinder pieces on the side, and you could put the figures inside, but there weren't really good seats or controls that kind of just dangled inside, which was a little bit weird. But it's not even remotely the right colors, and it's not even close to being the right shape. Now, they have remade this vehicle a couple of times, which we'll talk about on the episode of Brickology next week, and LEGO seems to really struggle with the shape of this escape pod in particular. So this is another one of my first sets. I love this set just for nostalgic reasons, but looking back on it, kind of like that Millennium Falcon, it's pretty rough. Now, not quite as rough is the first ever appearance of a normal TIE fighter in LEGO form, and this is a $20 set with 171 pieces. The figures included here were the first ever Stormtrooper in LEGO, which is weird to me that it took them that long to make a normal Stormtrooper figure. They actually made Scout Troopers with the indoor sets in '99 before they actually made normal Stormtroopers. Very strange little detail. Now, this set also, of course, included a TIE pilot who at the time used the exact same helmet as the Stormtroopers, and it had a blank brown head underneath the helmet, which was very odd because I know a lot of people used that head to customize making Mace Windu figures back in the day before they actually made an official Mace Windu figure in 2005. So really odd little fun detail about that figure. Now, as for the build of this set, like I said, the first ever LEGO TIE Fighter, and like the TIE Advance from '99, it used blue accent pieces for some reason. It looks dumb. However, the rest of the build is very solid. There's not much to say. It's a TIE fighter. You can put the figure in the cockpit. It looks like a TIE fighter. It holds up pretty well. And this one actually included a display stand similar to the TIE Dagger set we got a couple of years ago for the Last Jedi wave as well. A similar kind of design for a display stand. But besides that, nothing to write home about with this TIE fighter. It's just the iconic original LEGO TIE fighter. Now, in 2002, we got a re-release of that X-Wing set from '99 and a re-release of that TIE Fighter and Y-Wing set also from '99. Literally the same sets, just repackaged, different set number, but the same thing. So nothing really to talk about there. No new sets for that year. 2003 was another pretty underwhelming year for sets based off the original Star Wars film. The only set we got from 03 is the T-16 Sky Hopper. This was a $15 set with 98 pieces. The figures included here were a Skyhopper pilot, and that's it. Now, the Skyhopper pilot was a really cool looking figure. He had the X-Wing helmet piece, but in completely all red, and he pretty much just wore all red all around, which I think LEGO kind of made up this figure. It's not really a canonical character, but it is a very cool looking figure. Now, I'm not entirely sure why they decided to put this figure in this set, rather than just putting like Luke Skywalker in this set, because Luke Skywalker obviously mentions that he flies Skyhoppers in the original Star Wars film, and if you're confused what a Skyhopper is, if you're a casual Star Wars fan, the Skyhopper is that little vehicle that Luke Skywalker has a toy of that he plays with at the Lars homestead, and it's like parked behind him in the movie. Like the actual version he would use is parked behind him. However, you don't see it really getting used in the original film. I believe they add it in digitally in the special editions, but for the most part, you don't really see this Skyhopper vehicle actually in action. Now, the build itself has no enclosed cockpit, which is not entirely accurate. It's very open air, which looks a little bit awkward, but that made it easier to put the figure inside. Basically, it has a big fin, kind of similar to the Imperial Shuttle, and honestly, the Skyhopper has a lot of similarities to an Imperial Shuttle with two wings on the side and a big fin on top, and you could fold back that big fin and put your minifigure inside the Skyhopper itself, and there were some cool printed pieces on that fin, and there was some storage behind that towards the back. Nothing crazy to talk about, but honestly, it's a pretty good vehicle besides the lack of an enclosed cockpit. Now, LEGO even kind of struggled to make an enclosed cockpit with the remake of this set in 2015 that we'll definitely talk about in next week's episode. It's definitely an awkwardly designed vehicle that doesn't lend itself super well to LEGO form. Now, 2004, we got a re-release of the TIE Fighter and Y-Wing. Again. Yes, this set has been re-released 3 times. So strange, because LEGO doesn't really do that very often anymore, besides like the Saturn V or a couple of the Winter Village sets here recently. For the most part, they don't re-release these sets. Also, I think the Ship in the Bottle set was re-released as well, but besides those sets, they don't really seem to re-release too many sets, so very odd this set got 3 separate releases. Now, for original sets from 2004, we got one, and that is the first ever LEGO Mos Eisley Cantina. It took 5 years, but they finally made a Mos Eisley Cantina, and this one was a $30 set with 193 pieces. Now, the figures included with this set here, you get Luke Skywalker, you get Obi-Wan Kenobi, you get Han Solo, and you get the first ever appearance of Greedo with a brand new mold for his Rhodian head, and he also had arm printing, which was super cool. And you also get the first ever Sand Trooper and the first ever LEGO Dewback. And this Dewback mold has only ever appeared in this particular set, because the Dewback made in 2014 that was also released with the Cantina in 2020 is a different mold. Now, the build of this set, of course, includes the Cantina itself. It's a really small chunk of the Cantina. It's very, very tiny. It pretty much just has the booth with Han and Greedo. Now, if you're going to make one piece of the Cantina, obviously this is the most iconic part of the Cantina, so I understand why LEGO made that part the Cantina, but I think they definitely could have expanded it. You also had a bit of a folding gate that could like flip open that was rather underwhelming, and you also had a small side table, and there was a feature kind of similar to a Harry Potter play feature where the table in between Han and Greedo could flip open to reveal a hidden weapon. But besides that, a pretty underwhelming build for the Cantina. But you also got a build for Luke's Landspeeder, the first ever remake of the land speeder, which is now made in a different color. Now, the color for this land speeder in particular is kind of a weird looking like salmon color. I don't even know how to describe this color. It's not a color LEGO uses very often, but it looks really awkward. I believe it's the same color they used for the Geonosian battle droids from the Attack of the Clones sets. It looks very, very odd. However, this build was bigger, it had more accurate details, and honestly a lot of those details have been carried over to other versions of the land speeder we'll talk about on next week's episode of Brickology. It's a pretty decent looking design, although the colors still aren't quite right. And this set, I believe, is the last episode 4 set to feature yellow minifigures. After this point, the minifigures were recolored to flesh tone. So this is one of the last LEGO Star Wars sets ever to have exclusively just yellow minifigures and a green figure if you're Greedo. Next up here is the year 2005, and we have a new TIE Fighter set. This set, like the other one, was only $20, but it had actually less pieces at $159. Now, the figures included in this set here are, of course, a TIE Fighter pilot, still using that same kind of inaccurate, recolored Stormtrooper helmet mold, and you also got Darth Vader. Now, this Darth Vader figure was very special and only ever came in this one set in particular because he had a light-up lightsaber. Now, if you listen to my Revenge of the Sith episode, you kind of know what I'm talking about. In 2005, they made a lot of these Jedi minifigures, and Darth Vader in this case, have light-up lightsabers where basically their hand and the lightsaber were molded together, and there was a very small little light inside the lightsaber, and you pushed on the minifig head, it would make the lightsaber light up. Now, this did kind of ruin the customization of the figures. You couldn't remove the lightsaber or the heads, which was a little bit awkward, but it was kind of a cool thing. However, these light up lightsabers, it didn't last. It did not last. It was a brief little experiment LEGO did, and they actually even remade the Clone Turbo Tank set from the Revenge of the Sith with a Mace Windu without a light-up lightsaber, but it's a fun little detail. This is the only time that a light-up Darth Vader figure was made in his full suit from the original trilogy. Now, the build of this set, of course, is a TIE Fighter, which is super, super similar to the one from 2001. It's almost the exact same design, almost no changes were made, and yes, it is still using the blue accents. It's the last time we get a normal TIE Fighter with the blue accents because the version they came out with in 2012 finally kind of switched over to gray. However, the TIE Interceptor from 2006 still used blue accents the next year, but of course that is based off Return of the Jedi, and we'll save that for another episode of Brickology. Now, another set released in the year 2005 is our first ever LEGO Sandcrawler. It has a really nice piece count of 1,669 and it retailed for $140. Now, the figures in this set, you get the first ever appearance of Uncle Owen and the first ever appearances of Jawas in LEGO form, and of course you also got C-3PO and R2-D2, and then a plethora of other droids, which of course is pretty accurate to a Sandcrawler. You get R5-D4, R1-G4, an ASP droid, a Gonk droid, and a Treadwell droid. Lots of cool droid figures included with this set. As for the build of this set, it's the first ever LEGO Sandcrawler. Yes, I keep saying first ever, but this is a big build that's very blocky. And blocky does lend itself to Sandcrawlers pretty well, but there's kind of a lack of snot techniques here to the point that I think it just looks a little bit archaic and childish in its design. And it's a weird combination of colors because it's mostly brown, which is obviously the color the Sandcrawler should be, but they throw in tan bricks and lighter kind of reddish brown bricks as well to kind of give it like a rustic feel, which I get what they're going for, but because they used bricks instead of snot and it's like full-size LEGO bricks, it looks really awkward. So another hot take coming from LEGO League today, this Sandcrawler is kind of ugly. I don't think it's a great Sandcrawler design. Now, I don't have this set, I have no personal attachment to this set, but I don't personally love the look of it. Now, it did have treads underneath, which I believe this is one of the first times we saw the LEGO tread piece ever being introduced, which was cool, and of course, the ramp at the front could fold down. There's plenty of room on the inside of the Sandcrawler. There's also a magnet piece, which is a fun little play feature detail, and the cockpit had some printed yellow pieces, which looked pretty cool. There were some cool details and good playability with this set, but I think it definitely could have been better, especially for a 2005 set. Alright, we're more than halfway done with the 2000s decade of LEGO Star Wars sets based off of the original Star Wars film. The next set, our first set from the year 2006, is the Imperial Star Destroyer. This is a $100 set with a great piece count of 1,367. The figures included here are Darth Vader, just a normal Darth Vader, no more light up lightsaber, the first ever appearance of Grand Moff Tarkin in LEGO minifigure form. You also got an Imperial officer, a brick-built mouse droid, R2-D5, who is a black astromech droid. You get 2 royal guards, which royal guards are not in episode 4, so not a super accurate detail. There's actually one more detail in this set that continues to not be super accurate for this film in particular, and you get a stormtrooper. Now, the build of this set is, of course, the Star Destroyer. It's set. It's the first ever Star Destroyer LEGO made in minifig scale. In 2002, I believe, they made a UCS Star Destroyer. Now, I'm going to be doing an episode about every LEGO Star Wars UCS set at some point in time. I'm saving all of them for their own separate episode rather than filling up time in other episodes talking about the UCS sets. So be on the lookout for that kind of special Star Wars UCS episode at some point in the future. Now, this set looks really good. The design of it looks good. The shapes are all good. It's a very good looking model besides one thing. And that one thing is kind of the focal point of the build. That is the bridge section of the Star Destroyer towards the top. The bridge here looks fine. It's a little bit oversized in terms of scale, but it looks fine. However, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, I honestly cannot explain why this is. The bridge has a big window. And this window is not even covered with a windscreen piece. It's just completely open air. And you can see minifigures up there, and there's no way to cover it up. First off, that's not accurate to the movie. That's not how it looks in the movie. It just looks weird. And the fact that it's not covered up and you can see the figures inside looks so ridiculous. I cannot explain this. It looks dumb. It's so strange. Google it for yourself if you don't know what I'm talking about, because it just looks so weird. I can't explain that. It's such a dumb design choice on LEGO's part. However, they kind of made up for it with a pretty nice way to access the interior. You can remove the bridge and kind of that upper section, and then you could fold down 2 panels on the side to reveal the interior, where there's lots of storage space, lots of places to put minifigures. You have a space for Darth Vader's meditation chamber, which again is actually in Empire Strikes Back, so that's not entirely an accurate detail to the original Star Wars film, but whatever, we'll give it a pass. Brickset lists this set as an episode 4 set, which is why we're talking about it in this episode of Brickology. And you also have an escape pod room with, of course, an escape pod. And the escape pod itself had some nice sticker details on the side, and there's a pretty cool play feature with this escape pod where literally you can push a thing and it will deploy the escape pod out a hole in the bottom of the ship. Now, I think the escape pod takes up a lot of room, which I don't love, but it is a cool play feature, and not that many LEGO Star Wars sets actually have the ability to accurately kind of like drop an escape pod. Usually you just have to remove them manually, so I do really respect the escape pod play feature for sure. Overall, the interior is spacious and has lots of storage. It's lacking in some detail, but for the most part, I think it was fairly well done. And that is it for sets from the original Star Wars film. It's from 2006. We can now move into 2007, which around this time is when I really got serious with my LEGO Star Wars collecting. I turned 10 in 2007, and I remember getting a lot of these big sets and like actually being able to afford and get these sets and enjoy these sets, and was, a more conscious being at this point in time. And the first set here is the $40 454 4-piece set, the Y-Wing. Now, this is the first ever remake of a Y-Wing. The figures here, of course, are Gold Leader and R5-D4, so the same figures, just remade for this set. And the build is, like I said, the first remake of a Y-Wing. It's slicker than the OG version of the Y-Wing, has better curves and added some more greebling details, which does look really good. However, the design concept is very similar to the original one. It uses the same cockpit piece and lots of the same principles, just an added amount of detail. And they also added a bomb dropping play feature, which we love to see because it is very accurate to the Y-Wings in particular. So overall, a really good Y-Wing that also had a great price. I mean, $40 is great because Y-Wings now are like $70. So it's nice to get a nicely priced Y-Wing in 2007. Moving up $10 in price, the other set from 07 is the $50 471 piece set, the Imperial Landing Craft. This set included a TIE Fighter pilot, again, still using an inaccurate helmet. They eventually switched that helmet, but at the time, they still were using this inaccurate helmet piece. You also got 2 Stormtroopers in this set and 2 Sandtroopers in this set, which is pretty cool. And of course, the build is the Imperial Landing Craft itself, the first ever appearance of this vehicle. Now, this vehicle is actually not in the original Star Wars. It's only seen in the special edition from the 1990s, added with some kind of wonky CGI looking effects. But I do like this vehicle, and I wish we would see more of this vehicle. Maybe Lucasfilm can add it to some of their new Disney TV show projects or something, because I would love to see this vehicle get you a little bit more screen time. Now, it is a very similar looking vehicle in color and shape to the Imperial Shuttle, just some slight differences. The cockpit at the front could open up and has space for the TIE Fighter pilot to go inside. I'm not sure TIE pilots would be the ones piloting these vehicles. It's probably just an Imperial officer, but I'm not entirely sure, so don't quote me on that. Now, the back section here, the main section where you can store your troopers, could be dropped entirely from the build. Now, what I mean by that is it's on like stands and it clips in using some Technic pieces, and you could unclip those pieces and have the landing craft just take off and leave that whole section behind, which is not entirely accurate to how it works in Star Wars canon, but I loved the play feature. And the interior was honestly pretty nice because there's space for all of your minifigures, and it had not one but 2 of those big, chunky, spring-loaded missiles. I loved those missiles, and those things really, really worked well. And there was an additional bomb-dropping play feature. I mean, lots of firepower on this vehicle, and lots of storage for your minifigures as well. The playability for this set was seriously through the roof, and I had a ton of fun playing this with this set back when I got it when I was like 10 years old. And speaking of play features, the back wings had a very nice geared mechanism play feature, so you could fold them up when you are pretending to land the vehicle, which the remake in 2018 actually didn't have, which is kind of odd, and we'll talk about that one in next week's episode of the show. This, I think, was honestly a really, really successful set, and LEGO did a great job of designing it back in the day. Now, 2008 is actually the only year from this decade with no sets based off the original Star Wars film, because LEGO really honed in on the Clone Wars that year, which makes sense because of when the Clone Wars originally aired. So I understand why they didn't really do any OT stuff, but it's just kind of weird that there's no 2008 Episode 4 LEGO Star Wars sets. But now we can talk about the last year for today's episode, 2009. The first 2009 set we're going to talk about today is a very strange set in the history of LEGO Star Wars, because this is a set that has never been attempted again. It's a really odd little sub-theme that only ever spawned 2 sets ever, and that is the Millennium Falcon. Now you're like, well, Lee, LEGO makes Millennium Falcons all the time. What are you talking about? This is the MIDI scale Millennium Falcon. That is MIDI scale Millennium Falcon, and I'll explain what that means right now. Now, this set was $40. It had 356 pieces, no minifigures included with this set, and the build is a mid-scale Falcon. Now, what does that mean, you might ask? Well, mid-scale means it's not miniature. It is not a mini model, not a polybag size, advent calendar size Millennium Falcon. But it's not a minifigure scale Millennium Falcon either. It's kind of somewhere in between. So they're able to add some extra details, but it's still kind of a little bit of micro scale. Very weird, very strange. I'm not really sure why LEGO decided to do this. They probably thought fans would want a cheaper way to get a Millennium Falcon, but they probably underestimated how important minifigures are to lots of LEGO Star Wars fans when getting their favorite vehicles, so this ultimately was not a super successful thing. The next year they made a midi-scale Imperial Star Destroyer that we'll talk about in next week's episode of the show, so only 2 midi-scale sets ever came out. It had a printed cockpit, some decent Greebuild brick-built details. It honestly doesn't look too bad. I just don't really know where this thing fits in with a collection. It's just kind of a weird scale and a strange experiment from LEGO in 2009. Now, there are 2 more sets that are a lot more normal minifig scale sets. Thank God. And the first one here is Darth Vader's TIE Advance. This was a $30 set that had 251 pieces. Again, I keep calling it TIE Advance because that is the canonical name of this vehicle, but LEGO loves to call this thing Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. They don't actually throw the word Advance in their name for this set, which is kind of interesting if you ask me. The figures included with this set are just Darth Vader, which is accurate. Kind of wish you got more figures, but alas, what can you do? Darth Vader is the only figure that really should be included with this set. Now, the build of this set is the TIE Advance itself, and it's in gray! It's in gray. There's no longer blue accents. It's the first ever TIE vehicle LEGO has made with gray details instead of blue, which is glorious and amazing to see. So thank you, LEGO, for designing this thing in a more accurate color. Again, I wish they do sand blue, but whatever, I digress with that. Now, it's a pretty simple design. There were some hidden flick fire missiles, which flick missiles were introduced fairly recently at this point in time, and LEGO was really pumping them into pretty much every LEGO Star Wars set, and it still used the old style of TIE Fighter cockpit, one of the last TIE Fighters to use said style, but for the most part, it's a pretty simple design. I personally skipped on this one. I never actually got this particular vehicle, but I think it looks pretty good, and I'm just thankful that they finally switched from using those ugly and inaccurate blue accent details. And last but certainly not least, actually one of the best sets from today's episode of Brickology is the $150 set with 1,408 pieces, the Tantive IV/4. And if you call this thing the Tantive IV, guys, it's Roman numerals. It means 4. Stop calling this thing the IV, the Tantive. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're going to hear me rant more about people calling AT-ATs AT-ATs in my Empire Strikes Back episode, but I hate the way some people in particular pronounce this vehicle. Y'all are just straight up wrong. Okay, let's talk about this set. This was a 10th anniversary LEGO Star Wars set, which when they remade this set in 2019, that was a 20th anniversary LEGO Star Wars set. It had a special box. It was a big, big deal, and it's a really cool set. The figures included here were Princess Leia, C-3PO, R2-D2, a brand new exclusive Captain Antilles, and a Rebel Trooper. All really, really cool figures. Now, the build of this set, of course, is the Tantive 4. And it's the first ever time we've seen this in minifig scale. Like I said with the Imperial Star Destroyer, that had a UCS set before. This one had a UCS set in the early 2000s before. That we'll talk about in the UCS episode for Brickology. This is the first time we got a minifig scale Tantive 4, and it had an awesome cockpit piece with clear pieces with print on the side, which was really cool and I think worked out really well. And this thing had some great shaping. It had accurate guns. It had a middle section feature with a decent sized interior where you could fit a lot of your minifigures. It had some great fin details toward the back, and of course it had a couple of escape pods. Not quite in the right place because it's not, exactly to scale to the minifigures, but those escape pods could reenact the iconic droid escape moment from the film, and the back section accurately recreated the iconic engines of this vehicle. It was a great design back there. This was a really, really good looking set, and one of the best sets from this decade of LEGO Star Wars. Now, you might be wondering, you're like, Lee, you didn't mention what the fans voted as the best set. That's because I asked the fans what the best set was from LEGO Star Wars based off episode 4. However, they voted for a set that's from the next decade, so we're not going to talk about the best episode 4 set until next week's episode of Brickology. And hopefully that episode is out next week. Fingers crossed I get to record that one. That should be an even bigger and better episode than today's. And thank you so much for streaming today's episode of Brickology. I had a ton of fun making this episode. I'm stoked to record next week's episode as well. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Find me on all those websites I mentioned at the beginning of today's episode. Follow me on Spotify, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and follow me on Instagram. Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode of Brickology. God bless. Peace out. Bye-bye.